The Galactic Council had been at war for 300 years. The Velthari Empire, with their massive warships and cold logic, had conquered 17 star systems. Their commanders sat in floating chairs aboard ships the size of small moons. They calculated every battle with perfect math. They never made mistakes. They never changed their plans. Admiral Kethvos of the Velthari looked at the hologram floating before him. It showed the small blue planet called Earth. The humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were young. They were weak. They would fall like all the others. "Begin the invasion," Kethvos said in his deep voice. "Standard approach. This will take 3 days at most." His officers nodded. They had done this many times before. The Velthari way of war was perfect. It had worked for 1,000 years. Why would they change it? The Velthari fleet moved through space like a machine. 112 ships in perfect formation. Each ship knew exactly where to go and when to fire. There was no confusion, no improvisation, no creativity. Just cold, perfect efficiency. Kethvos had conquered 11 worlds himself. Each conquest followed the same pattern: arrive, demonstrate superior firepower, demand surrender. If the enemy refused, destroy their fleet and invade their planet. Simple, clean, logical. He expected Earth to be no different. On Earth, Commander Sarah Chen stood in the war room beneath the mountains of Colorado. Screens covered every wall. They showed the Velthari fleet approaching. 112 ships, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. "They'll reach orbit in 6 hours, said Lieutenant Park, his face pale. "Our entire fleet is 43 ships. We don't have enough firepower to stop even one of their capital ships." Sarah looked at the screens. She had read every report about the Velthari. She knew how they fought. They used the same tactics every time. They would position their ships in a perfect grid. They would fire in coordinated waves. They would never break formation. "They're predictable," Sarah said quietly. "Ma'am." "The Velthari, they do the same thing every time. They've fought the same way for 1,000 years. Sarah walked closer to the main screen. "Every species they've conquered tried to fight them ship to ship, tried to match their firepower." "Because that's how space warfare works," Park said. "You need bigger guns to beat bigger ships." Sarah smiled. It was not a happy smile. "That's what they think too. That's why they've never lost." She turned to face her officers. "But we're not going to fight them like that. We're going to fight them like humans." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Humans had a long history of fighting dirty when they had to. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and their own self-destructive tendencies. They had learned to adapt or die. "What do you need?" Park asked. "Everything," Sarah said. "Every civilian ship that can fly, every drone we have, every piece of junk that can be launched into space." She pulled up a list on her tablet. "And I need Mrs. Patterson." Park looked confused. "The old lady from New Jersey, the one who volunteers at the community center." "That's the one. Get her here in 2 hours." The first Velthari ships entered Earth's orbit exactly on schedule. Kethvos watched from his command vessel as his fleet arranged itself into the standard invasion formation. Perfect lines, perfect spacing, beautiful. "Human vessels detected," his sensor officer reported. 41 ships approaching. They appear to be cargo freighters modified with weapons." Kethvos made a sound of contempt. "Pathetic. They're throwing merchant ships at us. Open fire when they reach engagement range." The human ships came closer. They moved in strange patterns, not in formation at all. They seemed to dance through space, each one going its own way. Some moved fast, others moved slow. A few flew in circles for no apparent reason. "Sir, the human ships are not maintaining cohesion. They appear to be malfunctioning." "Or they simply don't know how to fight," Kethvos said. "Target the largest vessel and destroy it. The others will surrender." The Velthari weapons charged. Massive energy beams prepared to fire. Then something unexpected happened. The human ships scattered, not in retreat but outward in every direction at once, and from each ship came hundreds of smaller objects. "Sir, unknown projectiles incoming, thousands of them." Kethvos leaned forward. "Missiles, shoot them down." "They're too small, sir. Our targeting systems can't lock onto them. They're made of different materials. Some are metal, some are ceramic, some are organic matter." The small objects hit the Velthari shields. Most bounced off harmlessly, but some carried small explosive charges. Others were coated in acid that ate through hull plating. Some were filled with paint that covered sensor arrays and blocked vision. "What is this?" Kethvos demanded. "This is not warfare, this is garbage." "Sir, they're throwing actual garbage at us. Kitchen waste, used equipment, everything has been modified to cause specific types of damage." The Velthari shields flickered. They were designed to stop energy weapons and large projectiles. They were not designed to stop 10,000 pieces of random debris moving at high speed. On one ship, a modified washing machine filled with ball bearings smashed into a sensor array. On another, bags of fertilizer exploded against the hull, leaving behind corrosive residue. A third ship was hit by what appeared to be an old refrigerator packed with fireworks. "This is madness," one officer whispered. "They're fighting us with household appliances." In the Colorado war room, Sarah watched the battle unfold. The Velthari shields were holding, but barely. More importantly, their perfect formation was starting to break as individual ships tried to clear their sensors. "Phase 2, she ordered. "Launch the drones." From hidden satellites around Earth, 50,000 small drones emerged. Each one was the size of a basketball. Each one carried a different payload. Some had cutting lasers. Some had magnetic clamps. Some carried nothing but speakers that played very loud music. The drones swarmed the Velthari fleet. They were too small to destroy. They were too fast to catch. They attached themselves to hulls and started causing chaos. "Sir, hull breaches on 12 ships. The small devices are cutting through our outer plating." "Then shoot them," Kethvos roared. "We can't target them, sir. They're too small and moving too fast. Our weapons are designed for ship-to-ship combat." Kethvos watched his perfect fleet fall into disorder. Ships were breaking formation to deal with the drone swarms. Others were spinning in place, trying to scrape the devices off their hulls. The beautiful grid pattern had become a chaotic mess. "This is insane," he muttered. "No civilized species fights like this." On one Velthari ship, the drones had attached themselves near the communication arrays. The speakers turned on at maximum volume. Human heavy metal music blasted through the hull, vibrating through every deck. The Velthari crew, who had sensitive hearing, clutched their heads in pain. On another ship, drones had released swarms of Earth insects that had been genetically modified to survive in space for short periods. The small creatures crawled through vents and caused electrical shorts wherever they went. "Sir, the insects are eating the insulation on our power cables." "Insects, they're attacking us with bugs." A third ship reported that drones had attached to their windows and were projecting strange images. The crew was distracted by what appeared to be dancing cartoon characters. "Why would they show us this? What tactical purpose does it serve?" "None, sir. That appears to be the point." Back on Earth, Sarah received reports from every sector of the battle. The Velthari were confused. They had never faced an enemy that didn't try to match them weapon for weapon. They had no tactics for dealing with creativity. "Time for Phase 3, she said. "Bring in the civilian volunteers." Lieutenant Park looked at her with wide eyes. "The civilians? Ma'am, we can't send untrained people into a space battle." "We're not sending them to fight. We're sending them to confuse." Sarah pointed at the screen. "The Velthari expect military ships with military crews following military patterns, Let's give them something they've never seen before. From stations around Earth, 200 civilian spacecraft launched. They were pleasure yachts, mining vessels, research ships, and personal transports. Each one had been fitted with basic weapons, but that wasn't their purpose. Their purpose was chaos. The civilian ships entered the battle zone in what could only be described as a parade. Some flew in circles. Others did loop-de-loops. One particularly enthusiastic pilot wrote rude words in the vacuum of space using his engine exhaust. Admiral Kethvos stared at his tactical display in complete shock. His perfectly calculated battle had turned into something that looked more like a carnival than a war. "What are they doing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This makes no sense. There is no tactical advantage to any of this." His tactical officer was equally confused. "Sir, I cannot predict their movements. They're not following any known patterns. They're not following any patterns at all." The Velthari tactical computers, designed to analyze and counter enemy strategies, were overloading. They couldn't process data that had no logic behind it. One human ship was flying backward while playing what sensors identified as Earth music called polka. Another was releasing thousands of rubber balls into space, bouncing them off Velthari hulls. "Are those toys?" Kethvos asked. "Yes, sir, children's toys. They're filled with glitter." The glitter, once released, spread through space in enormous clouds. It stuck to sensors, clogged intake vents, and made everything sparkle in the most undignified way possible. A mining ship had modified its drilling laser to project words onto Velthari hulls. Currently, it was writing "Wash me" on the side of a battle cruiser. "Sir, that ship is defacing our vessel." "I can see that. Destroy it." "It keeps moving, sir. And when we fire at it, 2 other ships start doing the same thing in different locations." Commander Chen watched from Earth as the Velthari formation fell apart completely. Ships were bumping into each other as they tried to track targets that made no sense. Weapons fired at empty space, because targeting computers couldn't understand that a human would deliberately fly in a nonsense pattern just to be confusing. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Park said, "I think they're getting angry." "Good. Angry people make mistakes. Angry Velthari definitely make mistakes." Sarah pulled up a communication channel. "All civilian vessels proceed to Phase 3B time to get weird." The human ships regrouped into what looked like a conga line. They flew past the Velthari command ship in single file, each one honking their horn in a musical sequence that spelled out an insult in Morse code. Then they scattered again and began performing synchronized maneuvers that spelled out Earth swear words when viewed from above. The Velthari, who had learned human languages for their invasion, understood exactly what was being said. Admiral Kethvos felt something he had never experienced before. He was baffled. The emotion had no place in Velthari culture. They understood victory and defeat, success and failure. They did not understand this. "Sir, the lead human ship is requesting communication." Finally, something rational opened the channel. The view screen flickered to life. Instead of a military commander, Kethvos found himself looking at an elderly human woman wearing what appeared to be a bathrobe. She was holding a cup of something hot and had curlers in her hair. "Hello, dear," she said cheerfully. "Are you the one in charge? Lovely ships you have, very shiny. Now I was wondering if you'd be interested in some cookies. I baked them this morning. They're chocolate chip." Kethvos opened his mouth. No words came out. Behind the woman, a cat walked across the console, and she paused to pet it. "That's Mr. Whiskers. He doesn't like loud noises, so if you could keep the shooting down, that would be very nice." "This is war," Kethvos finally managed to shout. "We are here to conquer your planet." "Well, that's not very friendly. Have you considered diplomacy instead, much less messy?" The woman took a sip from her cup. "Anyway, I need to go. My show is starting soon. Nice chatting with you, dear. Remember, there's always time for cookies." The communication ended. Kethvos sat in his chair, completely frozen. His officers stared at him, waiting for orders. He had none to give. "Sir," the tactical officer said hesitantly, "the human military vessels have used the distraction to reposition. They're now behind us." Sarah Chen had been waiting for this moment. While the civilians caused chaos, her actual warships had moved through the confusion. They were now in position behind the Velthari fleet, where their shields were weakest. "All ships fire at will, target their engines. I want them unable to move, not destroyed." The human fleet opened fire. Their weapons were weaker than Velthari guns, but they were hitting unshielded targets. Explosions rippled across the rear sections of 10 Velthari vessels. "Engines disabled on multiple ships, ma'am. They're sitting still." "Launch boarding parties." This was the real plan. You didn't beat the Velthari by destroying their ships. You beat them by taking their ships. Human Marines, trained in zero-gravity combat and close-quarters fighting, launched from their vessels in small pods. The Velthari had never been boarded. Their tactics didn't account for it. Why would anyone try to capture a ship when they could just destroy it? It made no logical sense. But humans didn't fight with logic. They fought with creativity. The first boarding pods hit the disabled Velthari cruiser. Marines cut through the hull in seconds, swarming into the corridors with weapons blazing. But they weren't using standard military weapons. They were using paintball guns loaded with fast-hardening foam. They were using nets. They were using tasers and flashbang grenades and rubber bullets. "Capture, don't kill," Sergeant Rodriguez shouted as his team moved through the ship. "We want prisoners, not corpses." The Velthari crew had no idea how to respond. They were trained to fight enemies who wanted to kill them. They had no training for enemies who wanted to tie them up and leave them in closets. A group of Velthari warriors charged down a corridor, weapons raised. Rodriguez's team responded by throwing cans of silly string at them. The brightly colored strings wrapped around their arms and legs, tangling their movements. "What is this substance?" one Velthari demanded, struggling against the sticky strings. "Birthday party supplies," Rodriguez replied, securing the warrior with zip ties. "Happy Invasion Day." In the engine room, a group of Velthari engineers barricaded themselves behind heavy equipment. They expected the humans to burn through with plasma cutters. Instead, the humans pumped laughing gas through the ventilation system. 5 minutes later, the engineers were giggling helplessly while Marines handcuffed them. "They're laughing," one Marine observed. "I didn't know Velthari could laugh." "Neither did they," another replied. Admiral Kethvos received increasingly desperate reports from his fleet. Ships were being captured one by one. His crews were being overwhelmed by tactics so strange that they had no counter. "Sir, they've taken the Eternal Victory." "How? That ship has 3,000 crew members." "They released some kind of animal into the life support system. Small, furry, and apparently very frightening. The crew abandoned their posts to escape them." "Frightening? What could possibly be frightening about a small furry animal?" The tactical officer checked his notes. "The human database identifies them as ferrets, sir. They bite. And they are, quote, surprisingly fast and determined." On the Eternal Victory, chaos reigned. Ferrets raced through corridors, climbing up walls and squeezing through gaps. Velthari crew members who had never encountered Earth animals before fled in panic. "They're everywhere," one crewman screamed. "They keep appearing from nowhere." "That is what ferrets do," a human Marine explained patiently as he secured the bridge. "They're curious little guys. Don't worry, they're harmless. Mostly." A ferret named Mr. Noodles sat proudly on the captain's chair, cleaning his whiskers. Kethvos made a decision he had never made before in his 1,000-year career. All ships retreat, fall back to the jump point. But the humans weren't finished. As the Velthari ships turned to flee, they found their path blocked by a wall of satellites. Not weapon satellites, communication satellites. Every single one was broadcasting at maximum power. They were all playing the same thing. Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. "What is this?" Kethvo screamed. "It appears to be a cultural weapon, sir. Our crews are confused. Some are trying to dance." The music was everywhere. It drowned out communication. It interfered with navigation systems, and it was incredibly catchy. On several ships, Velthari officers found themselves humming along despite their best efforts. One commander was caught tapping his foot to the beat before he remembered himself. "Turn it off," Kethvos ordered. "Block the signal." "We can't, sir. They're broadcasting on every frequency, and they keep changing the song. Now it's something called Mambo Number 5. Commander Chen watched from Earth as the mighty Velthari fleet stumbled around in confusion, unable to retreat, unable to fight, unable to do anything but listen to pop music from human history. "Send them a message," she said. "Let them know our terms for surrender." The message reached Admiral Kethvos through the wall of music. He read it 3 times, not believing what he saw. The humans did not want to destroy the Velthari fleet. They did not want to conquer Velthari space. They wanted to trade. They wanted to share music and food and cultural exchanges. They wanted peace. And if the Velthari refused, the humans promised to do something called a flash mob in the middle of the Velthari capital city. Kethvos had no idea what a flash mob was, but after today, he feared it deeply. "Send a reply," he said, his voice defeated. "Tell them we accept. Tell them we surrender. Tell them." He paused, struggling with words that went against everything he believed. "Tell them we would like to learn more about these ferrets." The first human Velthari peace treaty was signed 3 days later. The Velthari Empire, undefeated for 1,000 years, had been brought down by glitter, loud music, an old woman with cookies, and a lot of creative thinking. The news of Earth's victory spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had hidden from the Velthari for centuries emerged from their hiding places. Empires that had been crushed sent messages of congratulation, and everyone asked the same question: how did you do it? Commander Sarah Chen found herself giving the same answer over and over again. "We didn't try to be better at being Velthari. We just tried to be better at being human." The Galactic Council, which had existed in name only while the Velthari dominated, called an emergency session. Representatives from 47 species gathered on the neutral station of Zenith Prime. They wanted to understand what had happened. More importantly, they wanted to know if Earth posed a threat. Sarah was invited to speak. She stood before the assembled delegates, feeling very small in a room designed for beings much larger than humans. "You're afraid of us now," she said simply. "I understand. We beat the Velthari when no one else could. You're wondering if we're the new conquerors." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Several delegates nodded their massive heads. Others rippled their tentacles in agreement. "We're not interested in conquest. We never were. We fought because we had no choice. The Velthari came to take our home, and we defended it the only way we knew how." Sarah looked around the room. "We're not warriors. We're survivors. We're adapters. We're the species that looked at a problem and found the weirdest possible solution." The Krellin ambassador, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish, pulsed with colors that indicated curiosity. "We have studied your tactics. We do not understand them. You threw garbage at warships. You played music at military vessels. You sent an elderly female to distract their commander. These are not rational military strategies." "Exactly," Sarah said with a smile. "That's the point. The Velthari have been fighting rational enemies for 1,000 years. They've perfected their tactics against opponents who fight logically. So we didn't fight logically. We fought creatively." She pulled up a hologram showing the battle. Every species that faced the Velthari tried to match their firepower. bigger guns, better shields, more ships, and every species lost because the Velthari were always better at that kind of war. But they'd never faced an enemy who would release ferrets into their engine rooms. The Morthak representative, a rock-like creature, rumbled with confusion. This ferret creature, it is a weapon. It's a pet. Humans keep them in their homes for companionship. They're small, curious, and they like to explore tight spaces. When we released them on Velthari ships, they crawled into everything. Vents, pipes, control panels. They caused more chaos than a dozen missiles. You defeated warships with pets. We defeated warships with everything. Pets, music, cookies, toys, anything that would confuse the enemy and disrupt their expectations. Sarah changed the hologram to show the aftermath of the battle. The key to adaptation is using whatever you have. Humans have been doing this for our entire history. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species on our own planet, but we survived because we learned to think differently. A tall, thin being called a Vexen leaned forward. Your planet has many predators larger and stronger than you. How did your species survive? We adapted. We made tools. We worked together. We figured out ways to beat creatures that should have eaten us. Sarah smiled. 1,000,000 years of evolution taught humans that the direct approach isn't always the best approach. The Velthari representative, a tall figure named Kethral who had been sent specifically to observe, stood up. You make it sound simple. It was not simple. Our fleet was the most advanced in the galaxy. Your victory was not just creativity. It was something else. Sarah nodded respectfully. You're right, creativity alone wouldn't have won. We also had determination. Every human who fought that day knew they might die. We sent civilians into battle zones. We risked everything. But we did it because we refused to accept that there was only one way to fight. And what way is that? Kethral asked. Your way, the proper way, the logical way. Sarah stepped closer to the Velthari. Your species perfected war. You turned it into mathematics. Every battle followed formulas. Every victory was calculated in advance. But you forgot something important. War isn't math. War is chaos. And humans thrive in chaos. The delegates were silent, absorbing her words. Then the Krellin ambassador pulsed again. You speak of adaptation as though it is unique to humans. Other species adapt as well. You do, Sarah agreed. But slowly, over generations. Humans adapt in minutes. When our first plan fails, we make a new one. When that fails, we make another. We never stop changing because we can't afford to. Our entire history is full of situations where we should have died but found a way to survive instead. She pulled up images from Earth's history. Humans building boats to cross oceans. Humans creating farming to survive harsh winters. Humans inventing vaccines to fight diseases. Humans walking on their own moon. We're not special because we're strong. We're special because we refuse to give up. When the universe tells us something is impossible, we take it as a challenge. When a problem seems unsolvable, we approach it from directions no one else would consider. The Morthak rumbled again. This sounds like madness. Sometimes it is. Humans have made terrible mistakes by being too creative. We've invented weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We've damaged our own ecosystem. We've hurt ourselves in countless ways. Sarah's voice became serious. Creativity without wisdom is dangerous. We know this better than anyone. Then why should we trust you? Kethral asked directly. If you can defeat our fleets with garbage and music, what prevents you from conquering us all? Sarah met the Velthari's eyes. Because that's not who we want to be. We fought your invasion because we had to, but we captured your ships instead of destroying them. We tied up your crew instead of killing them. We forced you to surrender instead of slaughtering your fleet. We could have caused massive casualties. We chose not to. She gestured to the gathered delegates. Humans don't want enemies. We want friends. We want trading partners. We want people to share stories with and learn from. Our greatest strength isn't our creativity in war. It's our creativity and peace. The hologram changed to show Earth's art, paintings, music, architecture, books, movies, 100,000 years of human expression in 1,000 forms. This is what humans really do. We create things, beautiful things, strange things, things that make people laugh and cry and think. War is not our nature, creation is. Sarah smiled. We would rather spend our creativity making something wonderful than making something destructive. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, the delegates began to talk among themselves. Sarah could see opinions shifting. Fear was giving way to curiosity. Suspicion was being replaced by interest. The Galactic Council debated for 6 hours after Sarah's speech. In the end, they voted unanimously to offer Earth full membership. Not because they feared humanity's military power, but because they were curious about humanity's creative potential. The Velthari Empire officially ended their conflict with humanity 3 weeks later. As part of the peace agreement, they agreed to reduce their military expansion and open cultural exchanges with other species. Admiral Kethvos, the commander who had tried to conquer Earth, requested a transfer to the diplomatic corps. He wanted to understand humans better. His first assignment was to learn about something called jazz music. He found it completely illogical. He also couldn't stop listening to it. 5 years passed after the battle. Earth had changed dramatically. Alien visitors walked the streets of major cities. Human musicians played concerts on alien worlds. Human artists created works that combined styles from a dozen different species. The collaboration went both ways. Velthari engineers helped humans build better ships. Krellan scientists shared medical knowledge that cured diseases. Morthak craftsmen taught humans new ways to work with metal and stone. But humanity's greatest export wasn't technology or science. It was culture. Human music spread across the galaxy. Species that had never experienced rhythm before found themselves moving to beats they couldn't explain. Human stories became popular entertainment on 100 worlds. Human food, adapted for alien biology, started appearing in restaurants everywhere. Commander Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen, stood on the observation deck of the new galactic peace station. Below her, Earth glowed blue and white. Around her, ships from 100 different species came and went in peaceful trade. "It's beautiful," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Kethvos standing there. The old Velthari looked different now. Softer somehow, less rigid in his posture. He wore civilian clothes instead of a military uniform. "It is," she agreed. "Hard to believe this all started with a war." Not just any war, the shortest war in galactic history. Kethvos moved to stand beside her. 3 days, that's how long my invasion lasted. Thousands of years of Velthari military tradition defeated in 3 days by humans throwing rubber balls and playing loud music. "Are you still angry about that?" Kethvos made a sound that Sarah had learned was Velthari laughter. "At first, yes, I was humiliated. My career was ruined. My species was embarrassed. But now," he looked out at the stars, "now I understand that you gave us a gift." "A gift?" "You showed us that there are other ways to exist. For 1,000 years, the Velthari knew only conquest. It was our purpose, our identity. Without it, we thought we would be nothing." He turned to face her. "But watching humans, seeing how you create and adapt and change, I realized that there is more to existence than winning." Sarah nodded slowly. "We learned that lesson a long time ago. Humans used to be like the Velthari, always fighting, always conquering. It took us centuries to understand that cooperation makes us stronger than competition. And yet you still fight when necessary." "Of course, we're not naive. Some threats can only be stopped with force, but we've learned to make fighting our last choice, not our first." She smiled at him. "Though I admit, the ferret attack was particularly satisfying." Kethvos made his laughter sound again. The ferret attack is now studied in Velthari military academies as an example of what happens when you underestimate an enemy. He paused. Also, several Velthari have begun keeping ferrets as pets. They are surprisingly charming creatures. We call that cultural exchange. Indeed. Kethvos reached into his coat and pulled out a small package. I brought you something, a gift from the Velthari people to mark the anniversary of our peace. Sarah took the package and opened it carefully. Inside was a crystal that glowed with inner light. Patterns swirled within it, constantly shifting and changing. It's beautiful, what is it? We call it a creation stone. The Velthari used to make these long ago before we became warriors. Each one is unique. The patterns are generated by emotions. The person holding it shapes the colors with their feelings. Sarah held the stone up to the light. As she did, the patterns shifted to warm oranges and peaceful blues. I didn't know the Velthari made art. We stopped. For 1,000 years we created nothing but weapons and war plans, but you reminded us of what we used to be. Kethvos gestured toward the stone. This was made by a Velthari child. She is learning to create again as our ancestors did, because of you. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. This is the best gift I've ever received. There is more to tell you. Because of human influence, the Velthari Council has voted to transform our military fleet. We will become explorers instead of conquerors, discoverers instead of destroyers. Kethvos stood taller, pride in his voice. In 3 months, our first exploration vessel launches. It will carry scientists and artists instead of soldiers, and it will be named the Human Spirit. Sarah laughed through her tears. That's either a great honor or a terrible joke. Both, Kethvos admitted. We have learned from you there as well. Humor is surprisingly powerful. We have discovered that laughing together creates bonds as strong as fighting together. They stood together for a long moment, watching the ships come and go. Human vessels flew alongside Velthari ones. Krellin trading ships docked beside Morthak cargo haulers. The galaxy was becoming something new. Do you think it will last? Sarah asked. The peace, I mean. There are still threats out there, species that want to conquer and destroy. There are, Kethvos agreed. And when they come, we will face them together, all of us. The Galactic Alliance exists because humans showed us what creative adaptation looks like. You beat our fleet with toys and music and an old woman with cookies. I have no doubt you could do the same to any enemy. We'd rather not have to. I know that is perhaps the most human thing of all. Kethvos turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, the old woman who distracted me during the battle. What happened to her? Sarah grinned. Mrs. Patterson, she's become an ambassador. The Galactic Council loves her. She still offers everyone cookies. She says no important decision should be made on an empty stomach. Of course she does. Kethvos shook his head in amazement. An empire falls to cookies. The universe is stranger than I ever imagined. That's another human specialty, making the impossible seem normal. Sarah looked back at Earth. We never thought we'd be here, fighting aliens with ferrets and glitter, making peace with conquerors, changing the galaxy, but here we are. Here we are, Kethvos agreed. And wherever here leads, I suspect humans will find a way to make it interesting. He left and Sarah remained on the observation deck. Below her, Earth continued its eternal dance around the sun. A small blue world that had faced the greatest military power in the galaxy and won through sheer creativity. The Galactic War had ended, not with a final battle or a devastating weapon. It had ended with rubber balls and ferrets and Rick Astley. It had ended because humans refused to fight the way they were supposed to fight. And in the years to come, that lesson would spread across the galaxy. Species would learn from humans that there was always another way, that problems had solutions beyond violence, that creativity could triumph over force. The universe was big and dangerous and full of threats, but humanity had proven that even the greatest challenges could be overcome by thinking differently. Admiral Sarah Chen smiled as she watched the stars. Out there somewhere was the next crisis, the next impossible problem, the next enemy who thought they had humanity figured out. They would learn the same lesson the Velthari had learned. Never underestimate humans, never assume you understand them, and never ever ignore the power of creative adaptation. Because when the universe says something is impossible, humans just say, "Hold my beer." And then they find a way. Years later, historians would write about the Great Galactic Shift, the moment when the galaxy changed from an empire of conquerors to a community of cooperators. They would debate the causes and the consequences. They would analyze the tactics and the treaties. But the real story was simpler than any history book could capture. A small blue planet had refused to accept defeat. Its people had looked at an impossible enemy and asked not how to beat them, but how to surprise them. They had reached into their strange, chaotic, beautiful culture and pulled out everything they had. Garbage and glitter, music and madness, ferrets and friendship. And they had won. Not just the battle, not just the peace. They had won the future, a future where creativity mattered more than firepower, where adaptation triumphed over tradition, where the strangest solutions often turned out to be the best ones. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere, in a retirement home in New Jersey, Mrs. Patterson was still baking cookies. Because even in a universe full of wonders, some things never change. And some things shouldn't. On the bridge of the human spirit, as it prepared for its maiden voyage into unknown space, Captain Kethral looked at his mixed crew. Velthari scientists worked alongside human engineers. Krellin navigators floated next to Morthak security officers. It was a ship built on cooperation, launched in hope. "All stations report ready," the human first officer announced. Kethral nodded. "Set course for the unexplored sectors. We go not to conquer but to discover." As the ship jumped to light speed, leaving the familiar stars behind, Kethral thought about how much had changed. His grandfather had commanded fleets of war. His father had conquered worlds. And now he commanded a ship of peace. The humans had taught them that victory meant more than winning battles. It meant building something worth protecting. And as the human spirit sailed into the unknown, carrying the hopes of a dozen species, the universe held its breath. Not in fear, in anticipation. Because whatever was out there, whatever challenges awaited, they would face it together. With creativity, with determination, with the stubborn human belief that anything was possible if you were willing to think differently. The Galactic War had ended. The galactic adventure had just begun.